Hello, everyone. I'm recording this on August 29th, 2017. And just a few days ago, on August 16th, was the 40th anniversary of Elvis's passing. That's 40 years, folks. And the stream of people making pilgrimage to Graceland has never stopped, especially on his birthday and even more especially on the day of his passing. Thousands and thousands of people come to Graceland on that day. And this anniversary, apparently more have come than possibly ever before. Now, most of these people coming were not even born when Elvis passed. Us oldies who were there at the time and lived the experience are fading away. And before long, there won't be any of us left. And this will keep on going. I truly believe that Elvis's message, his spiritual heart message, will continue to draw people on and on until, as one person said, until the world blows up, which may be coming sooner rather than later. But as long as there's a planet, I believe Elvis's legacy will continue in a very personal and profound way for many human beings on the planet. Now, Elvis wasn't a perfect human being. None of us are. But he had a mission. We all have a mission, and his was rather out front and outstanding, at least in this lifetime. We all get our turn at being in a place that determines history in a big way. When I say we, I'm speaking of our souls, and that stretches out beyond time and space. So I'm not attempting to put Elvis on a pedestal in that sense, but there's no question that he evolved to a place in his own spiritual personality and being that in this incarnation, he could fulfill that mission. Granted, it physically brought him down at an early age, and it's not the stories you will hear of his strong addiction to drugs and all of this. It was illness, extreme illness, a lot of illness, which caused him to take more prescription medicine that was probably good for him. That's a long story, and I won't get into it here, but it's in the book. And of course, he could have made choices about a lot of different things in his life. We all could. But he didn't have people around him that were able to help him find what he needed to change his situation. Health is an issue that I can certainly empathize with. And when you're drowning in physical symptoms, you reach out to what you can find to help you in the moment, unless you have greater knowledge about these things. And this was in the 70s. And so he didn't have that knowledge. He couldn't Google it. He couldn't access it. And when he tried to, through some of his friends, he was cut off from receiving the natural health remedies that could have helped him. Again, another story. But going back to this individual and his purpose in life, my book brings out the deeper esoteric nature of a pilgrim on the path, any pilgrim on the path, but this specific one, and how his life reflected our own in a very deep and profound way. My personal story with him I imagine began in this lifetime anyway, when I was about 6 years old, 6 or 7. And I told my mother I was very deeply affected by his voice. I didn't put it into those words, but that was my message. And yet, I was so young, it really didn't take hold until I was 13. And that's when Elvis really began to make an impact on my life. Not because I had some teenage crush on him. It was far greater than that. And I wasn't in love with him. It was not that. I just had this strong spiritual feeling, connection to him, as many people have. I certainly wasn't unique in that way, but I'm speaking about myself and my personal story here. And of course, his music, his singing, his ability to project spirit through song and music was absolutely incredible and very inspirational. And yet it went even further than that. In 1969, I was able to, my mother and I, go to Las Vegas to see him perform. That was the first time I saw him perform, and I was absolutely struck by the energy, the spiritual power that was flowing through him. Now, this wasn't all his spiritual power. Yes, he was a beautiful, pure soul, really, in many, many ways. Flawed as we all are, but there was this spiritual purity about him that you had to experience, in the flesh, as I did many times in his concerts. However, that wasn't all that was coming through Elvis. This incredible spiritual power that was coming through him was above and beyond just the individual soul. It was as if he was a portable stargate. It was like when he walked on stage, before he even sang, it was like this stargate opened up inside him. That's the only way I can explain it. And we all reached to touch the stars. It was our homing path. It was like he allowed us to help us to remember on some intrinsic way that we were spiritual beings experiencing a human expression, but who we truly were was sort of quickened inside us when he came on the stage. Now, people reacted in many different ways. Some were screaming, little girls jumping on, trying to jump on the stage and grab him, and all the teeny bopper stuff that they did for Sinatra and the Beatles and all of that. But that was just surface stuff. I talked to, experienced many people at these shows. I saw 36 concerts during his lifetime, 36 or 37, beginning in 1969, and the last one was in 1975, I believe. And I didn't just have wonderful experiences with Elvis, but with the people that came to see him. And the stories were very varied, but they were speaking about something here that was far more profound than the typical teenage rock star crush thing. And many of the people that came were older males, and not the ones that were imitating Elvis, but just regular guys with incredible stories to tell about what they experienced with Elvis. So all of this is more or less covered in my book in various ways. And there's also the deeper esoteric part where I go into his past lives, or those that I have touched upon, because my life has been unique as well, in the sense that I have been aided by ultra beings and mentored by one such Thoth Hara all my life, and consciously since 1967 or 8, 67, I believe. And so I'm also able to, or I perceive that I am able to source translate from the Akashic record And I brought through some of Elvis's past lives that are in this book, as so far as my perception is concerned. And the interesting thing about it is that many years later, when I met Wanda June Hill, which is another big part of the story, she was able to supply me with transcripts of Elvis speaking about some of these lifetimes. So when we look at Elvis, we see ourselves in a broader stroke of the pen. It's like a quickening or awakening on some level. Of course, many people were not affected by Elvis at all. They saw him out of the corner of their eye, and it didn't do anything for them because they weren't, on the track of receiving from him. Human beings come from all different quadrants of space and time, and in this lifetime, that wasn't where they needed to receive their spiritual input, which is perfectly okay. But so many of us received it, not exclusively, but received it in one very dramatic way through Elvis Presley. And when I wrote this book, I wanted to reach people that were not Elvis fans. I mean, certainly I'm hoping that people who loved him will read this book, and I think they'll get a lot out of it. But I really wanted to write this for people who had missed him along the way, and maybe now they want to take a second look and experience some of the energies that presented themselves through him. And, time is an illusion anyway, so you can pick up on it now. In the book, it's a lot of transcripts from personal conversations that Elvis had with another dear friend of mine. I say another dear friend of mine as if Elvis was a friend of mine. Kind of feel like he was. But a friend of mine, Wanda June Hill. And I met Wanda in an unusual way. After Elvis passed, I read a book she wrote about him. It wasn't just written by her. It was written by her and 12 other people that all knew him in an unusual way through telephone conversations. Because Elvis, being very lonely, he had all these guys around him and everything, but basically he could not talk to them on the level he wished to talk. And he just wanted to reach out to people. He was very, very lonely. So he would call people up. Sometimes he just got the phone book out and called people up. I know that sounds amazing, but it was true. And but he met Wanda in another way, and I detail it in the book, so I won't get into it here. But he continued to communicate with her and her husband and her little daughter at the time, who was 5 or 6. He'd get her on the phone and talk to her, and she just loved it. She didn't know who Elvis was, but she sure loved talking to this fellow, whoever he was. And then he wanted to talk to Wanda's mother, and he wanted, he just he kept on going. He wanted family around him. He liked to talk to families, not just individual people. And so Wanda met people through him. He'd say, "Oh, I have someone you just got to meet," another phone friend, and he'd connect them, and then they'd get to know one another, and that's the way it went. And many years later, Wanda found out he had phone friends she had no idea about, that they were not involved with her at all, but they were other phone friends. You see, the interesting thing about Elvis that some people who knew him have difficulty with is that he shared different things with different people. It didn't mean that he didn't feel that person was worthy to hear a certain thing about him. It was just that he felt guided to share certain aspects of his life with different people. And there were things he shared with Grandma Susie, another woman I met who was a dear friend of Wanda's, who she had met through Elvis, another phone friend, and they called her Grandma Susie. She was, at the time, the oldest of the whole group of people that they knew that were phone friends of Elvis that he'd introduced to everybody. So Grandma Susie knew things that that Elvis told her that he didn't tell Wanda, and he told Wanda things he didn't tell Grandma Susie. And this is a little difficult for some people that, felt they were in his confidence. But it wasn't a shutting them out or anything. It was just his way. He was acting on deep instinct as to what he shared with whom. And the only reason Wanda found out about this was after his passing. They shared things with one another that he'd shared with them, and they found out that there were all these different aspects of him he'd spread around through the friends of his. Elvis was constantly seeking spiritual truth, especially when he matured a little more in the mid-60s. 1964, I believe, was when he met Larry Geller, who became a close spiritual confidant of his. And that's when things really started opening up for him. Although columnist Mae Mann swears that before that even, she was giving him metaphysical literature because they were friends. He was not just she was a reporter, but they were, I guess, the only reporter ever that was really a close friend of Elvis's. So he was on the path that early in his mid-20s. When I say on the path, I mean like a bulldog. That was the most important thing in his life. And he pursued it to the end. His physical body, as he said, was burning up, that he couldn't stay in this vibration much longer. And that's what he said toward the end of his life. And because he knew that he would probably pass early, he'd seen it, he'd known it in his visions, but he also physically knew it because he was diagnosed with cancer in the 1970s. And he didn't tell his family, he didn't tell hardly anyone. There were 1 or 2 to 3 people he told, and that was it. And, that was his choice, but that's what he felt he wanted to do. Anyway, so he knew he was coming to a close rather early, and that caused him to want to pursue all of this even further. He wanted to be prepared for the next stage, for the next lifetime, or whatever came after the Elvis life ended. My experience with Wanda Hill, as I said, began right after his death, and I had read her book. I sort of got off the path here. I want to get back to it. And I had written her just a letter that I felt this book was so beautiful and so true to heart and not some kind of sensational thing. It had been published by a very small publishing company. And so it went out of print rather quickly. Wanda had the opportunity to publish by a big publishing company, Macmillan, and I've seen the letters that they wrote to her, but they were begging her to release the audio tapes of her conversations with Elvis, which he gave her permission to record for the most part. There were a few when she was at a doctor's office where she worked and he called her, but she just kind of flipped the switch on the recording machine and didn't say anything. But for the most part, she had his permission. That didn't matter. Legally speaking, Elvis was not legally in his contract permitted to allow someone else to record his speaking voice, anything. But of course, that didn't faze Elvis. He wasn't concerned. It was his voice if he wanted to share it with someone. But we must remember that those tapes are very special for many reasons, and they are not a part of the book. The transcripts are, however. And so Wanda shared with me many of the tapes, and I have in my possession some of these, or copies of them. And from these, I compiled, and from the transcript she sent me as well from other tapes, I compiled what is in this book of Elvis's spoken words. Now, why did Wanda turn all this over to me? And what is this all about? Well, when I first contacted her, she said, "Are you Christine Hayes?" That was my original name, that wrote Red Tree? And I said, "Yeah, that's who I am." And I wondered, how did she know about my book? And she asked for a copy, and I sent her a copy. That was that at the time. Later, I was to learn that Elvis had given her, toward the end of his life, just like months before his death, a list of 22 books that were his favorite books. He said, "If you don't do anything else, read these books." Now, Elvis had a library of well over 1,000 books, most of it metaphysical, some of it medical, because he had wanted to be a doctor when he was young. So, but most of it was metaphysical, spiritual works. He was a member of Self-Realization Fellowship, and a very close friend of the current, well, she's passed since then, but of the preceding head of the spiritual order, who was Dayamata. She preceded Yogananda himself, and Dayamata has since passed. But he was a close friend of hers. So this list of 22 books, on the list was my book, Red Tree, because I had given it to him from the stage. And of course, this was very rewarding for me to find this out. So some time passed after Wanda received my Red Tree book, and I didn't know about that then. It was later that she told me it was on his list. That's why she knew about it. And then I received that Elvis's soul had come from the blue star Rigel in Orion, as my soul had. I also listed some other people, and something one of my publications, my monthly publications, I was talking about the blue star, and I mentioned that Elvis's soul was from there. Anwar Sadat's soul was from the blue star. I just mentioned a few people. I mean, there's plenty of people, I'm sure, that are from this particular creation star. But anyway, that's when she wrote me back with everything. I mean, she just opened up completely, because Elvis had told her in 1970 in a taped conversation that his soul was from the blue star Rigel. And so that is what started it all for us. And she felt that I was the one that should write this book with her transcripts, because she had written these two other short books, and they were beautiful, but she just touched on the spiritual depth. She said she was afraid to go any deeper because she didn't know enough about it. But that when she read my writing, it was a lot like what Elvis talked about. And then when she heard this, that he was, my sources had said he was from the blue star Rigel, and she was the only one. She and maybe she played it for her husband or something, but she was the only one that knew Elvis had told her, and she had it on tape, the same thing. So this convinced her to allow me to write the book. I didn't ask for these tapes for the book. I don't even remember if I was going to write a book before then. Maybe I was. I don't remember. But in any case, that's when she gave me these transcripts, which compose a good deal of the book, but certainly not all of it. And so on the tape that she had, where she was discussing in 1970, Elvis was in Vegas, and he was very ill with a head cold, a flu, or whatever. He had a very weak immune system, and then he had to kiss all those women and things, he did the germs. And so he was not well, and he was in a very reflective mood. And so they're talking, and he says, he's talking to her about how he intends, oops, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Let me find it for just a moment. All right, here it is. So Wanda's saying to him, "You are really into all of that spiritualism type of things, huh?" Remember, this is back in the 70s. These kind of things were not generally known. Yes, if you were a member of Self-Realization Fellowship or the Rosicrucians or something, then you were into it. But otherwise, it was not out there. So Wanda was like, she didn't really know what he was into here. And he says, what? No, not spiritualism. Spiritual development, soul growth, and learning to develop the powers we all have lying innate. I'm not a conjurer of spirits. I don't have to, but I am not of this world either. I know that. I know who I am. I'm a man, a human being now, but what is me is not from here. And then there's a pause, because I have a copy of this tape, so I know there's a pause. And then he says, I am from out there. Did you ever hear of Rigel? She says, no. Is it a country or a person? And then Elvis says, a place. My home is near there, my other home, where I am from, and I have the blue star for my sun. I have 8 moons and a mansion beneath the outer shell of my planet. You think I'm making this up, but it's true. You'll know that one day. You'll remember what I told you before you die. You'll see some of it happen, and you'll be involved because you and I are tied together. And you don't know it, but I do. I can't tell you how. I don't remember it, but I feel it in my heart, in my inner self, and so do you. Why are we talking? Why else are we talking about this? Why are you here? Why am I? I care about you because you are part of my past, as I am yours, and together it makes that tie in this life. Because of you and me, things will happen. People will do things and have opinions and change minds and perhaps be more content, happier, because of you and me knowing each other. That is life. And that last sentence about because of you and me, things will happen and people will do things and have opinions and change minds, I can't help but think that perhaps some of that is referring to the fact that she and I would collaborate on this book. And I've not really been able to do much with this book because I did have it self-published through Balboa, which is a subsidiary of Hay House. But when you get a book, you don't just let it sit there. You promote it. And I'm not able to physically travel around and do book signings and all of these things. So it's not been put out there. The people that I have read it, who have written to me, and many of them, most of them actually, are not quote unquote Elvis fans, have said they wept while they were reading it. So obviously it's touching deep chords. And I feel this is a book that will see its time, maybe after I'm gone, but it will come forward. But I'm sharing it with you now. So it's coming forward in a way as I speak about it to you at this time. Elvis wrote to Wanda, actually wrote this at one time to her, I believe. I'd like to be remembered when I'm gone from this earthly life for my efforts to bring joy, happiness, and a time of freedom from everyday cares to other human beings. Just think of me as the redbird in a winter-worn bush on a snowy day, a bit of color in a sometimes dreary world. In my Blue Star Love book, I also have a section with copies of pages from books he owned that Wanda gave me, and that have underlinings by Elvis and written in his handwriting, little passages, things he was writing in the books. And in his copy of The Teachings of Buddha by BDK, which was given from Elvis to Wanda, and from Wanda, I don't think she actually gave me this book, but she allowed me to photocopy this part out of it in his handwriting. And it says, my vow, I promise to try to live a pure life, to practice faith, to seek perfection, to meditate daily, to practice abstinence and free my body from lusts of the flesh to the best of my ability. And he signed it his full name, Elvis Presley, just like the autograph. And then in the book, he has circled a particular paragraph, and he writes above it, "So true." And this paragraph is, "For 10 years, the prince was immersed in a round of music, dancing, and pleasure in the different pavilions of spring, autumn, and winter. But even his thoughts reverted to the problem of suffering as he pensively tried to understand the true meaning of human life." He was a real student of these books. He, underlinings and writing in the margins and just going through it very meticulously. There's one rather funny here. He circled where it says he must avoid women, and he circles this and puts never, never. And here's the book list of the 22 books that includes my Red Tree book that he gave Wanda to read. He said, if you don't do anything else, read these books. The Impersonal Life, Joseph Benner. The Initiation of the World, Vera Stanley Alder. The Prophet, Kekil Gibran. The Mystical Christ, Murdo Medwald Bain. The Secret Doctrine, Helena Pravana Blavatsky. Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East, volumes 1 through 5. The Leaves of Moria's Garden, volume 1 and 2. My book, Red Tree. The Philosophy of Schopenhauer. Life of Christ. The Autobiography of a Yogi, of course, by Paramahansa Yogananda. Cosmic Consciousness. The Intimate Way. Sacred Science of Numbers. The Inner Reality. The New Age Voice by Larry Geller. Just One Voice. The World Around Us. The Bible, Old, New, Revised Versions, and Lost Books thereof. The Agony of Christianity. Joyful Wisdom. The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. And in a Bible that Elvis had given to Jim Hill, Wanda's husband, for his birthday in 1977, this is the last year of Elvis's life, so it would have been months before his death. But in this Bible, tucked away inside it, was a poem written by Elvis. And it obviously had been written recently, that year probably. I sit here alone, thinking, watching how the moon's light glows, meditating upon the garden water there below. I've only just begun to spend my life, to have some fun. But as I think of all I've lost, the hurt hangs on, so slow to go. I'm now full grown and called a man, but really, is that what I am? My heart's so young, it feels like new. To think I'm getting old makes me very blue. Lord, just let me laugh and be the clown I am. Please give me dignity and grace so I can have the strength to face these final days that seem to race. Let me have some time to do all I can, so facing death won't be such a task. Please, Lord, thy will be done. That's all I ask. In my book, I also write about and have some pictures of a ring that Elvis gave Wanda and she gave to me. This is not some fancy, expensive diamond ring or anything. It's really far more precious than that. And I'm going to read you a little bit about it. Wanda wrote to me saying that the ring, and I'm quoting from her now, this ring is very heavy, made from some metal, not silver, not all gold, and seems to be brass and something. It is big. On the sides are shields with 3-point tops and oval rounded sides and bottom. On the shields that can be seen, they can still be seen somewhat, it's very well worn and old, are eagles with the wings spread and the head sideways. They are small and they are standing on big boughs, it looks like, though hard to tell, it's so worn. There is a blue inlay of some kind below the bow and rounded areas that seem to be water, maybe or perhaps clouds in the sky. Above the eagle's head is a curved long vine or something with one arrowhead, looking like leaf-like at the end. That's on the sides of the ring. The top has a large base that is beveled to look like, to me, sun rays all around, a center that has raised bed of what looks like copper, and on top of that is set another set that is about 1/2 inch long and a tad less wide, with a cut off top and bottom to the whole thing. In the center is some kind of, the top setting is some kind of design that has gold set into it or onto it in the very center. Where the light or sun hits it, it sends a bright light out of it. The top is a rough cross, as far as I can tell. It is worn down too, and there is behind the cross red color inlay. Across the whole bed of it is some white inlay that looks maybe like a robe or part of one. It's worn down too. Well, she goes on describing it, so I'm going to sort of skip some of this because it's difficult to picture. She's doing her best with it. But she says, this ring was given to him. He was supposed to give it back when he didn't complete the necessary steps, etc., that it took to reach his goal, to be a priest so he could really help people in need of spiritual guidance. This was when he was wearing those big scarves over his shoulders, different colors, white for step 1, gold for step 2, and there was 2 more, with the last one to be lavender. I don't know the third now. He gave it up because Priscilla, even though they were separated and divorcing, and his father ridiculed his efforts and his desires so much and convinced him he wasn't able to handle his own problems. How could he even think he could handle anyone else's? Anyway, he felt he couldn't do it. Plus, he couldn't rid himself of the sleeping pills entirely at that time either. He thought they were wrong for what he wanted to be and do also. Anyway, this ring was supposed to be more than 100 years old, and I believe it. They would not take it back from him because they felt he should have it. He was very moved by that. He didn't tell me much, just that it was old and that it carried within it all the saints who had gone before, given their lives for their religious beliefs and to save mankind from evil, that it belonged to the master priest, which he was striving to become one of. They gave it to him at his second ceremony, and he was to take full charge of all it meant at the fourth, but he never completed the third or fourth. They wouldn't take it back as it belonged to him, so the master told him. He ought to have it, but to wear it sparingly, as he had not fulfilled his full training, and it was powerful. Well, I certainly don't wear it. First of all, it wouldn't fit me, but it's sitting on my altar. To continue with what Wanda said, he said it was the only one, the original handmade and designed by those who formed the Society of the Brotherhood. He could not say who, what, or where, didn't want to talk about it. I think I have seen pictures of him wearing it on stage shots, but only a very few times. He gave it to me and said I should keep it as it was valuable and the spiritual background of it was sacred. He wanted me to keep it, put it away safe, and leave it there until I found the right place for it, that it would show me when the right time was right. I should never wear it except when I needed to have spiritual strength and understanding, as it would protect and guide me. And then he said those many spirits from the past would be there for me. Well, wow, as I'm rereading this, I'm thinking perhaps I need to not just let it lie there. Perhaps I should use it in some of my sacred work. I'll have to be with that. I don't want to interlope on anything that I'm not supposed to be doing. But he said that the ring would tell her where it was to go, and she gave it to me. And sort of on borrow, but she's never asked for it back. So perhaps I should ask the ring, so to speak, if there's anything it needs to be doing, or perhaps it needs to go back to Wanda or something else. I don't know. But I started taking it for granted. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, I need to talk to this ring now. And let's see, where else do I want to go from here? He's still talking about the ring. He said it had come from European background, and he was looking forward to being worthy of it. And I think that is why he quit wearing it. He didn't want to keep it for fear it would disappear or he'd lose it somehow. I think he was afraid someone would take it or discard it because it's not actual gold or white gold, but it does have some on it. That center strip is almost like a lightning bolt, but it's worn and you can't really tell what it was. It certainly reflects the light, as does the edging, which is very tiny and delicate. Yes, and of course the lightning bolt was Elvis' symbol. And I continue saying in this book here, my Blue Star Love book, I continue saying, my inner mystical sources also say that Elvis' soul is one of those known as the children of the sun. In correlation with this, Elvis told Wanda June Hill that he began his career in August, the month of the sun, recorded his first record at Sun Studios in Memphis, where his first hit was I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine, and that he worshiped the sun in a past life. He continued making comparisons to his life and the sun. He died in the month of the sun, and the last of his mystical costumes, which he wore, was the Aztec sundial suit. So here we see Elvis and King Antiochus in Turkey. Obviously, the resemblance is striking. Actually, it's even more striking than this. I couldn't find a comparison picture that really did it justice, but the statue is obviously very Elvis-looking, as many statues were of the ancient past, ironically. This one is one of the ones that I list as one of Elvis's past lives, King Antiochus of Turkey.